Hi, everybody, and welcome to another exciting edition of Words, Images, and Worlds. So glad on this episode to be talking with comics creator, author David Walker. David, thank you for taking some time and talking with me for a little bit.
Thanks for having me. Looking forward to this.
Yeah, my pleasure. I'll name a couple that I was actually trying to boil down the list of what you've done to a couple of favorites, and it's really difficult to do that with the work that you've done. But there are a few titles that stand out. Luke Cage being one of those. Nighthawk, of course. Bitterroot is some of the best working comics in the past 10 years or more, I think. Really intriguing series. And then you also have some work in sort of a fan favorite world of mine, which is the Planet of the Apes series that's currently ongoing. I think issue 5 is coming soon or something like that.
It's probably coming soon because I just got a notification. Marvel, when they send you your comps for something that you've worked on, they send it to you a month after it's come out. So when I got my comps for issue number one of Planet of the Apes,
Hmm.
um, I got it like the week issue two came out. And so
Gotcha.
I got email notification that there's something coming from Marvel, and I was like, oh, that's got to be the comp for issue four, which means issue five is about here. So,
Hmm.
not that I'm complaining about the way they do things, but it will confuse me because people will say, oh, I saw the comic and it looks great, and I'm trying to figure out, well, what are they talking about? Which issue is it? And
Uh-huh, uh-huh.
it's always crazy. So, but yep, Planet of the Apes.
Oh, yes. And the chronology is always interesting because I ask people about work that they're doing that I've read, and many times guests will be thinking about something that's slated for 2024 or 2025. I'm like, no, it's this thing I just read.
Yeah, it could be really crazy. We were talking before we started recording about a meeting that I had with a publisher for a book that's coming out July 2024.
Mhm, mhm.
And you know, in my mind, it's like I can't even fathom that, right? And we're
Yeah.
going over cover concepts, and they sent me just yesterday. I got the quote unquote final proof of the book, which I have to go over to make sure there's not any that I don't spot any mistakes. And again, I'm like, yeah, this book's not coming out till July.
Right.
Why do you need this in 2 weeks? Because I've got so much other stuff to do.
Yeah. Yeah. It's its own process. It's its own world.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I'm gathering anyway. Um, so you've also worked in the world of film, which is something that's really interesting to me and always interested in those connections from comics to film and back and forth. And the other title that I'll make sure to mention is Naomi as well.
Yeah, no, there's and Naomi was a in a lot of ways was a labor of love because I co-wrote that and co-created that with Brian Michael Bendis, who's um and when I sometimes stop and think about how long we've been friends, I get freaked out. Um and I was talking to his oldest daughter the other day, and she's getting ready to turn 21, and I have known Brian and his wife since before their daughter was born. So
Yeah,
yeah, we've been friends a long time. That so Naomi was something that was very much a long time coming.
nice, nice. Yeah, yeah. My goddaughter just graduated from high school, so I'm there with you and being
Yeah.
like, what?
There's no greater way to measure the passage of time than I don't have kids of my own, so I have to measure it through the children of my dear friends, and some of them are already adults. That's what
Mhm.
that messes with my mind all the time.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So let's take it back to when you were a younger person, because I typically ask about those origin stories. Being an English teacher, I'm always interested in what connects people with the written word, but then also being an English teacher that really embraces media, curious about film and comics and how all of this has come together for you.
Yeah, so it's a very interesting sort of way that it happened. So I was growing up in the early 70s, and at the time there was two shows that were on in syndication, and
Mhm,
that was the live action Batman TV show
mhm.
and the animated Spider-Man show, which I loved both of those as a kid, and I was familiar with both of them before I even knew how to read. And so my mom at a for me at a very early age, she bought me my first comic books. My first comic book was an issue of Batman, and I didn't know how to read at that point. And but that comic, and she bought me that because she knew I loved Batman. That comic made me want to know how to read, right? And I've seen a lot of kids who have that same desire. It's like they just want to be able to read. Maybe their parents read to them. And my mom read to me. She would read to me, like Dr. Seuss sort of stuff. And that was fine. But I really wanted to be able to read Batman on my own. um, and so that's where it started for me. And there was I was trying to look up the dates of this, and I totally got sidetracked. But in the 70s, there was a company called Power Records, and they would put out these little 45s, and there was a comic book attached. And so you put on the 45, and it would be like this audio drama, and you could read along. And when you had to turn the page, it would be this beep, and you turn the page.
Yes,
And
yeah.
so there were I distinctly remember the Fantastic Four one that I had, the Batman one that I had, the Captain America one that I had, and especially the Captain America one, because that's where I was introduced to the character of the Falcon, was in this particular book and record.
Mhm.
And then they had a set of Planet of the Apes. They had four Planet of the Apes that were go down as the worst adaptations of Planet of the Apes you could possibly imagine. But those were also really instrumental in me learning how to read, because I could listen to them and read along. It was a read along sort of thing. And then Planet of the Apes in and of itself was this huge thing. So um, I watched as a kid. I watched Planet of the Apes, the original movie, on TV the first time it aired, which was, I want to say, like 73 or something like that.
Mhm.
And a lot of people don't realize that before Star Wars became what it became in 77, there was Planet of the Apes, and there was Planet of the Apes comics, and there was Planet of the Apes book and records, and there was toys and all this stuff. And I was so um, enthralled with the apes. So it was really, Spider-Man, Batman, both from TV shows, and then Planet of the Apes.
Mhm.
And because of that interest, um, my mom would buy me these comics, and Marvel started putting out that black and white Planet of the Apes magazine, and my mom would buy that for me. And the crazy thing about that magazine was that not only did it have comics in it, every issue had articles about the making of the movies, articles about one thing or another. And um I she wouldn't buy me Savage Sword of Conan. So there wasn't any I couldn't read those articles, but there were other magazines ultimately that my mom would start buying me in the 70s that Marvel put out, and those also had articles. And I want to say it was Warren was putting out reprints of Will Eisner's The Spirit, and
Mhm.
she bought me those too. So as I'm my interest in this medium of comics, of sequential art, coincided with a time when there were publications that also had articles in them.
Mhm.
um, and so I was sort of getting this double dose. It's like, okay, I'm reading Planet of the Apes comics, but then I'm reading articles about whatever was tied into the world of that fandom. And so a lot of um a lot of the things that really got me going, and then continue to get me going, started there, right? So you
Mhm.
had the comics as a whole. But and I tell people this, I was a really nerdy kid, and but reading those sort of magazines um let me know that there was a lot of kids think things just sort of, and adults think this way too. They watch a movie, and they they think the stuff just magically appears, right?
Mhm,
You know,
mhm,
they don't pay attention. But I was that really weird kid who paid attention to stuff. So, you know, I would, when I would get a comic, I would look to see who wrote it, and I would look, but I was really more interested in who drew it.
mhm,
And so I, you know, I slowly started to piece together that, oh, somebody does this, right? Like you can do this. And so to me, I was always as interested in the process by which things were made as I was in the things that I was, you know, I guess for lack of a better term, consuming, or that I was immersing myself in.
mhm, mhm. Yeah, yeah. I was one of those kids that read the credits
Yeah,
on TV shows or movies, and it's like, what does that person do? What does that person do? But I love that idea, like the constellation of like you got the TV stories, the movie stories, the comics, the prose about the comics, and all of the things. Fandom is just a great way to grow up, I think, and to learn how to read and engage.
yeah, and again, you know, we're talking at a time when um our access was significantly limited compared to now, right? The
Mhm, mhm,
Now with the internet, there's so much stuff that we can get. But you know, back in those days, you know, there'd be a book about monster movies, you know, and
mhm,
there'd be
mhm.
like a photo of like maybe Boris Karloff and Bela Lugosi, and it would be, and there's also the magazine Famous Monsters of Filmland too, which was Forrest J. Ackerman's publication. But you were sort of limited in where you got your information from, but when you
Mhm.
got it, it felt like something really special. And the other day I was clearing out some stuff out of my closet, and I found a bunch of um these books, these various film books that in a lot of ways are outdated and obsolete. But I'm not going to get rid of these things, man. They're like
Mhm.
um I just remember there's a book called The Creature Features Movies Guide that I must have gotten in the early 80s. This was even really before the like home video took off, right?
Mhm.
Um, and so this wasn't even a video guide. That's the thing that people don't like. People don't even remember what video guides were, but I remember going through this book and like A to Z, just reading the entry for every film,
Yep.
and making a note of like, you know, okay, these are all the movies I want to see someday. And
Mhm.
then we had a subscription to TV Guide magazine, which I read religiously, and I would mark stuff down. I would, you know, and especially if it was like on the Late Show, because again, younger people don't know what the Late Show was, but you know, these would be movies that'd be on at like 2 in the morning. And so the key was like, okay, I got to take a nap. You know, I'm gonna
Right,
have to take a
right.
nap, so that I can be up to see whatever this particular film is. And yeah, I immersed myself in it, you know, didn't have a girlfriend and didn't play sports, and just sort of really, and knowing all the time that like ultimately I want to be able to be part of this world more than just reading about it or watching a movie when it was on TV, and you know, that sort of thing. Like I want to somehow figure out how to be part of this process, because it meant so much to me reading these comics or watching these movies, watching some of these TV shows, that you know, it'll sound corny, but it felt like I had a calling at a very early age.
Mhm, mhm. Not corny at all. Not corny at all. Uh-huh. And I love what you said there about the Sam Wilson Falcon character, and I love the trajectory of that character, and
Yeah.
how just this past year I pulled in the Captain America Sam Wilson first couple of appearances with the class, and looked at it as part of like American literature, to kind of take a look at the character and where things were, and how the development has been there.
Oh yeah, no, I just was going through a bunch of my comics the other day, sort of culling stuff and going, okay, I need to make room for things, and I have probably the first 10 or 15 appearances of Sam Wilson in Captain America. You know, back when he was in that green outfit, and
Hmm,
he was
hmm.
a villain, and I was like, yeah, I'm not getting rid of these. These have to stay. And
Hmm.
yeah, that character was always fascinating to me, and still is. And I'll go back and there's I keep telling myself, "Ah, I got to get rid of some of these comics. I've got too many of them." And then I'll be looking at them and I'm like, yeah, I just can't get rid of this. I've got these issues of Luke Cage, Hero for Hire, that are beat up, man. Like they're the kinds that you would find at a flea market for 10 cents a piece, never bagged, never boarded. The very definition of a reader comic. And I
Yeah.
was looking at these like 2 nights ago, and most of them have been reprinted, if not all of them. And I was like, I still can't get rid of these things. They smell like old newsprint, and
Yes.
there's
Yeah.
that, um, fortunately, I like that smell. That might be weird, but I like it.
Not at all. Not at all. I talk with friends of mine, and the smell of an old comic has its own particular aesthetic. And I
Yeah.
mean, and if you're like me, you can sort of remember moments in life by the comic you were reading or the film you were seeing at that point in time.
Oh, I agree 100%. And I think that, and the older, me being this sort of grumpy old man, I'm always like, I mean, you kids don't know how lucky you have it. Like,
Mhm.
I grew up before the direct market. I grew up before when you got your comics on the newsstand,
Mhm.
and if it said to be continued at the end of the comic, you just had to pray that you would get the next issue. And I can't tell you how many comics over the years it took forever for me to know how the story ended.
Yeah.
And there's one in particular that there was this comic in the 70s called Skull the Slayer that Marvel put out, that for whatever reason it was my all-time favorite comic, for a brief window of time. We'll say like 77 or whenever it was that it came out. And it ended on a sort of cliffhanger, and then they carried the story over into Marvel 2-in-1 with the Thing. Ben Grimm meets Skull the Slayer,
Uh-huh.
and then that was continued. That was a to be continued, and I never got this next issue. It took
Yeah.
me years. Like I'm going to say probably close to 10 years before I finally, go into an old comic book store, go through their back issues. It was on my list. I had an index card where I wrote down everything I wanted. I'm looking
Mhm.
for Doc Savage #5, and I'm, things like that. And it was like, you know, I have to say to kids now, again, you've got the internet, and you can go on to Marvel Unlimited or Comixology and find these things. But when
Mhm.
I was a kid, so
That's right. That's right. Same here. And the number of times you'd pick up like a number two of five and be like, oh yeah, okay, I guess I'll get with this. Um,
yeah, yeah.
yeah. But a button push away to any story that you want, usually collected, but not always collected. Um,
Yeah, no, I mean, and I was just having this conversation with some other creators not that long ago, and there was a time when there were almost no collections. Um,
mhm,
they I want to say it was Fireside Books did a collection of the Dark Phoenix saga. They also did one of, I want to say, Iron Man, the Demon in the Bottle, and these were pretty significant, and in part because Bill Sienkiewicz did the covers for these things, right?
mhm,
And
mhm,
um and these were the precursors to the trade paperback. You had books like Origin of Marvel Comics, Sons of Origins, Bring on the Bad Guys. I had all of those, but when those two particular books came out, even though I had all those issues of X-Men, it felt so different to have it in a book. And then in the mid 80s, early to mid 80s, I remember Kimiko started putting out these collections of Matt Wagner's Grendel, not Grendel, Mage.
mhm,
And those were like early ones. And so you would see these things, but they felt like they still felt like rarities, right?
mhm,
And
mhm.
um and the only thing that the best part about them though was it gave it, at least for me, it gave me a sense, it gave a feeling of legitimacy, because you know people were still like, "Oh, you're reading comic books," and it's
Right,
like, no,
right.
this is a book, right? It's square bound. You know,
Yeah.
you pull out the shelf at Walden Books, which was like the when I was a kid growing up was the big book chain, Walden Books.
Same, same. Yeah. It could stop a door. You could stop a door
Yeah,
with the book. Yeah.
yeah. And those are like those are the things I don't get rid of. I sort of I've pretty much divorced myself of the oh, this might be worth something with the individual floppies. You
Right.
know, it's I can't even keep track of where they are. So
Right.
it's like, oh, hey, you know, there's the especially from the 80s, there's a couple key series that that as far as I know have never even been reprinted that I've held on to, but it'll be like, oh yeah, there's 10 issues of this comic and 5 issues of those are missing. And so what are you gonna do?
Right, right. Yeah. Right. So is the on the creator side, on the processing side, what is it like for you to, because you do such a wide range. You have I mean, Planet of the Apes, you have superhero oriented comics, but then you also have the Black Panther Party and
Yeah.
Frederick Douglass. So what is it like to explore across genres that way and form?
You know, it's actually I'm grateful for it, and I was just having a conversation not that long ago with Andrew Aydin, who co-wrote the March books with
Hmm.
Congressman John Lewis, and he's a Andrew's a hardcore comic book nerd, right? Like anybody who doubts his cred, he's got that cred, right? And yet he's best known for these nonfiction books that really I think has helped set a new course for this medium that we work in.
Hmm.
And you know, and now I'm there. I've done 2 nonfiction books. I've got a couple of proposals out for some other ones, and I really love that. Right? Like I'd rather I find the 2 nonfiction books that I've published through 10 Speed are at the end of the day more rewarding than say the Marvel stuff I've done or the DC stuff I've done, which is saying a lot because those books are rewarding. Naomi is rewarding, and I don't regret having worked with one of my best friends on it. And you know, the kid in me is you know over the moon that I got to work on Planet of the Apes or that I wrote Luke Cage, but there's the creator in me who wanted something more. I mean, when I finally really broke into comics and started and was able to do it for a living, I was, you know, I'd already had a career. I'd already done a whole lot of other things, and I sort of came into it with my eyes open. And I think that, you know, I had a time where I was able to scratch some itches and check some things off my bucket list. Um,
Hmm.
but when I look at like the Black Panther Party, and when I talk to whether it's teachers or librarians or parents, or more importantly, young people who've read that particular book, it's like that book is going to have a life beyond anything that I've done for a company like Marvel or DC. And by that I mean, you know, you're a comic book nerd, I'm a comic book nerd, right? So we can
Hmm.
sit down and we can, you know, we can discuss, say, X-Men
Hmm.
or New Teen Titans. Those are the two that come up because those were 2 of my favorite titles when I was a kid. And you know, maybe we can bond over, you know, the Marv Wolfman George Perez run on the New Teen Titans or the Chris Claremont John Byrne run on X-Men. And most fans of that of this particular medium and the genre of superheroes will have specific creators or specific runs that they like, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
But to the rest of the world, it's just X-Men books, right? To the
Right.
rest of the world, it's just, you know, whether it's Teen Titans or Batman, there's though those characters and those worlds are bigger than any one creator, right?
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
and you know, as far as I'm concerned, there's probably never going to be a run on Thor better than Walt Simonson's. You know, there's probably never going to be a run on Daredevil better than Frank Miller's,
Hmm.
but that tells you how old I am. You know, that
Right,
tells you what,
right.
because I say that, but then I'm like, oh, you know what? Ed Brubaker's run on Daredevil is pretty damn awesome, right? So, um, and it's it's interesting because you spend your life reading these comics, reading you will say primarily superhero stuff, and maybe fantasize about creating these, being part of that world.
Hmm.
But the end of the day, you know, for me, and this can sound somewhat cynical to people, it's like, yeah, okay, I was part of that world, but most people aren't ever going to know. You know, there's some people that will say, "Oh, your run on Power Man and Iron Fist was my favorite, and I loved it, and it was the best ever." And I'll
Hmm.
say, "Thank you." I said, "But you really should read Joe Duffy's and Kerry Gammel's because,
Right.
like, that's it. Like it never got better than that, you know." And I did a panel with Mary Jo Duffy several years back. It was a virtual panel, so it was during the pandemic, and I was like, you know, everything I did in Power Man and Iron Fist was inspired by what you did with Power Man and Iron Fist. And there's some other writers who came along and did some really good stuff with those characters and that team, but not like what she did, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
And but that's me, and that's that again. That speaks to the era that I grew up in, um, and when I look at what we can do in this medium, um, to me, it's like, oh, I want to do more stuff. I mean, I look at Will Eisner and I think, well, only Will Eisner can do Will Eisner stuff, you know,
Hmm.
and by that I mean specifically things like Contract with God, or you know, the his New York books, those sort of things, and
Hmm.
that's, to me, that's what Black Panther Party and some stuff that I'm working on that'll be coming next year. Um, that's the contribution I want to be. I'm hoping that I'll be remembered for.
Yeah, yeah. Well, they speak to what the medium can do.
Yes.
If the superhero genre, or I guess it would be a subgenre, is not necessarily your thing, it's good to know comics is this medium where you could tell stories that are based in science, stories that are based in history, and stories that haven't been told, or stories that haven't been told as much as they should. And so it speaks to that legitimacy you were talking about. It's a book kind of thing.
Yeah.
It speaks to that legitimacy of comics, and I feel like we're now at the place where it's not a novelty. It's not like, oh, there's a comic book of that and it's kind of a one-off. Like,
Yeah.
we're at a place where there are enough of them and there are enough creative voices that are saying, yeah, this is a great way to tell a story and to convey a message.
Oh yeah. No. And there's, you know, within the last 5 6 years, there's been some pretty amazing adaptations, right?
Hmm.
The three that come to mind are Slaughterhouse Five, To Kill a Mockingbird, and The Diary of Anne Frank. And
Hmm.
all three of those were done as graphic novels. And but they weren't like the Classics Illustrated comics that I got when I was a kid. You know, I mean, I
Right.
grew up, I had uh, dozens of Classics Illustrated and Marvel Classics, and most of the Marvel Classic stuff were reprints of this other publishers, you know, stuff that was drawn almost exclusively by Filipino artists like Nestor Redondo, Alex Nino, Alfredo Alcala, and you know, that was my introduction to Moby Dick, or to,
Hmm.
you know, Treasure Island, and I love that stuff. But you look at like the I think it was Ryan North who did
Hmm.
the
Hmm.
Slaughterhouse Five adaptation. Like, you know, and I'm not saying don't read Kurt Vonnegut's book, because you should read Kurt Vonnegut's book. But that graphic novel stands on its own,
It
right?
does. It
And
does.
so we're at a point now where we're not getting, you know, 32-page adaptations of epic novels. We're
Hmm.
getting epic works that are taking into consideration, um, what it would be like to translate this particular work into a completely new language, and that language is the language of sequential art.
Mm-hmm,
Um,
mm-hmm.
and you know, because I was that guy when I saw that there was a Slaughterhouse Five adaptation. I rolled my eyes and I was like, oh, no, this this is not this isn't going to end well for anybody. And
Mm-hmm.
then I picked it up and I flipped through it and I was like, wait a minute. And then I bought it and I was like, you know, holy crap,
Yeah.
this is something incredible. And and so I think about that. I think about like I would love to write an adaptation of what I think is like, I'll say classic American literature,
Mm-hmm.
something from the more modern era. So I wouldn't necessarily want to do, um, I don't know. I can't think of I can't think of anything
No,
anyway right
no
now.
Nathaniel Hawthorne or
Yes, no Nathaniel
Herman
Hawthorne.
Melville or those
Yeah,
things.
no,
Yeah, yeah. I would be interested to see an adaptation. And Slaughterhouse Five is one of those that you read the book and you think, how in the world could this be a graphic novel?
yeah,
And then you pick up Ryan North's adaptation and it's like, oh, okay. Yeah.
yeah.
It's
And for me, I don't draw, so so the challenge is it's twofold. One would be convincing a publisher to let me tackle that. Then it's the challenge of finding the right artist and figuring out, because there's some adaptations, and I don't want to knock them, but in the 90s there was an adaptation of Richard Matheson's I Am Legend,
mhm.
that Steve Niles wrote. I can't remember who did the art, and there was it was a very faithful adaptation with lots of blocks of text, and I think that there's a time where that sort of adaptation would have made sense, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
I was just looking through these I Am Legend comics not that long ago, and but I remember thinking this time around, as opposed to when I got all this stuff 20, 30 years ago, um like, oh, I want to see something different. I want to see, and again, Ryan North delivered that um with Slaughterhouse Five. I there's and and I've been really critical of some stuff. There was a Fahrenheit 451 graphic novel that I was like, and hey, not to poo poo whoever worked on it, but I was like, what was the point of this?
Right,
Right.
right.
Like, um it was, if I remember correct, because that was the other thing too. I think that with both I Am Legend and Fahrenheit 451, I think they kept all of the text. I think they,
Yeah,
um and it's like, nope, that's that ain't the way to do it in
that's
my
heavy.
mind anyway. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. I would absolutely love to see a literary adaptation from you. I think that would be really interesting to see out in the world.
well, there's a, I guess you could call it a pseudo literary adaptation that is coming next year. It hasn't been talked about much publicly, but um, I'll give you some insights into that. We could talk about that a little bit for
Yeah,
sure.
yeah, I'd
Um,
love it.
yeah, I have, I did the Black Panther Party book that I did for 10 Speed Press. I did with an artist named Marcus Kwame Anderson, and him and I have reunited to do a new book for 10 Speed Press. And the right now the working title of this book is The Adventures of Big Jim and the White Boy. And it is a retelling of the adventures of Huckleberry Finn from Jim's perspective.
Love it. Love
And
it.
so it's a very uh very, very different than what Mark Twain wrote.
Yeah.
It obviously takes a lot from Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, but it also is inspired by Django Unchained and Little
Oh,
Big Man, and a lot of things like that. Um, and it was an idea that had been kicking around in my head for a very, very long time, and you know that particular story lent itself to lends itself to a retelling. And in a lot of ways, what inspired it was a book that I read when I was a kid, or when I say a kid, in high school, which I, for the life of me, cannot remember the title of. I think it's called The Frankenstein Project or The Frankenstein Papers. It was
Mhm.
by a guy named, I want to say Fred Saberhagen. I'm probably massacring that, but it was Frankenstein told from the monster's perspective.
I love
Um,
it.
and so I must have read this book in junior high or high school, and was sort of like, you can do that, you know, and I for a long time I just thought, I would love to see Huckleberry Finn from Jim's perspective, but I'd like to really do an exploration of really what it meant to be, enslaved in Missouri in the 1840s and the 1850s, and why would he? What was the reason he escaped? In Mark Twain's book, he's escaped because he's looking for his family, and it's like, but that's never really talked about. And Twain, for all the stuff he came out and said in you know the anti-slavery stuff that he said later in life,
Mhm.
and it never changed the fact that his family owned slaves, right?
Right.
And so I wanted to address that. I also wanted to address the myth of the Confederate hero,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
how, as a society, our pop culture has it since the moment the Civil War ended. We Society has sort of embraced this idea of whether it's the Confederate hero or the Confederate anti-hero, and to be honest with you, it's kind of sickening. And so I
Yeah.
was like, let's turn that on its head, and so rather than glorifying, whether it's the outlaw Josie Wales, or um even career criminals like Jesse James, have sort of been turned into this anti-hero of sorts. It's like, now let's what would happen if we glorified a runaway slave and his white teenage sidekick, who
Mhm.
you know um who were disciples of John Brown before John Brown left the Kansas, Missouri, the bleeding state, the bleeding Kansas campaign, and then went to Harper's Ferry,
Yeah.
and so
Yeah.
that book's coming next year, 2024. It's epic, and the art is absolutely amazing, and I'll just say the art's amazing. I don't want to toot my own horn because maybe the writing will suck. I don't know, but Marcus, who again did the Black Panther Party, we did that book together, is not only one of my favorite artists to ever work with. He's just a great collaborator and a great person, and um, it's this is like a daunting book, because I honestly, every time he sends me pages now, because I finished writing it a while back, I keep thinking to myself, I'm never going to be able to top this. I mean, I finished writing the thing like 7 months ago, maybe. Right now, it's been about 7 months since I've worked on it,
Mhm.
and he'll be finishing the book up later this year, early next year. But I can tell you at this point, I have not topped that anything that I wrote in that book. And it's kind of like, oh my God, is this it for me? Is this as good as it's gonna get?
Well, I can't wait to read it, talk about it, and feature it on here. And yeah, it sounds fascinating. And as an English teacher who's never just really quite sure what to do with Mark Twain, honestly, uh, um, yeah, I'm excited to also share that with students that I work with as well.
Yeah.
And I can confirm, thanks to the wonders of the internet, that that was the Frankenstein Papers by Fred Saberhagen. So
Okay.
you were spot on there. Yes.
There you go. God, that's I want to say that book was like 81 or 82. I mean, I that was um but I remember seeing it and buying it, and I probably still have it somewhere because I saved too many books. So
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Same here. Same here. Um, so other creative works that are out on the horizon that you can talk about or mysteriously point to. as well as any appearances that you want to mention.
Yeah. Well, we're back in the lab working on Bitterroot. That's Sanford Green, Chuck Brown, and myself working on Bitterroot.
Mhm.
Um, and it's slow going. We had all thought that this new arc, which is just going to be a 5 issue volume, we all thought it would have been we would have at least had the first issue out by now. But all three of us have our own things going, and
Mhm.
it's it's like, hey, you want to get together for dinner Saturday night? And it's like, nope, I've got something going on. How about Sunday night? Nope, I've got something going on. But so we're working on that, and I'm hoping that will drop in early 2024, maybe around March or so. And so working on that, and then I'm trying to think what else I can talk about. I've got my debut novel, my debut
Mhm.
YA
Mhm.
novel comes out mid 2024 from Scholastic Books. And that is uh but I don't think I can talk about that right now. So I just know that I know that I just had a meeting with Scholastic very recently. And so I'll come back when I can talk about it. But we
Yes,
had the
please
meetings
do.
where they showed me like the rough cover concepts, and we were talking about it, and it's crazy to me because it's a book that I wrote um more than 10 years ago, and nobody was interested in it, and my career in comics hadn't taken off, and I thought to myself at the time, well, maybe if I push harder to make a name for myself in comics, maybe that will do something for the book.
Mhm.
And that's
Sure
exactly what
enough.
happened.
Yeah.
And now I realize, oh, I'm about to be a YA author, and that's a
Mhm.
very different world than comics. Um, so much so that I realize, like, I know how to do comic conventions. I don't, and that answers the question of any upcoming appearances. I don't have any appearances in the remainder of 2023 unless the last minute I decide to go to New York Comic Con, which I don't think I will. But it's like, I don't know how to be a YA author. Like, I don't know what kind
Uh-huh.
of events they go to, other than, there'll be, I know there's the American Library Association does their conferences, and
Mhm.
there'll be
Mhm.
scholastic book fairs, and there's book tours and all that stuff. But like, even that level of engagement is very different, right? The
Mhm.
fans are
Mhm.
different. Comics, I'm just as often dealing with middle-aged guys,
Right.
or sometimes middle-aged women, middle-aged non-gender or non-binary individuals.
Mhm.
I'm used to that. But like, oh, I'm about to go into the YA world. Like, is am I going to be who are the fans going to be? What's it going to be like? And I just emailed actually Cami Garcia and Margaret Stahl, who are both incredible YA writers,
Mhm.
and they work in comics, and so I know them through their work. I've read the Beautiful Creatures books,
Yes.
um,
Yeah.
but I know them personally through comics, and it dawned on me the other day. I was like, oh, I'm gonna have to reach out to them. Like,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
they're the ones who are gonna, like, I honestly feel like I'm the new kid in town. I'm about to be the new kid in school. Like, I know, hey, we're moving to another city. Let me
Right.
find.
Right.
Oh, I know somebody who lives there. Let me find out. What's the appropriate slang to use when I'm talking to the other kids. So, it's got me really intimidated and really scared, but like, this is part of what I want to do next in the next phase, right?
Mhm.
Is when you're writing prose, and when you're writing, something that doesn't have a lot of pictures in it, you're using a completely different set of muscles as a writer. You're asking for a lot more from your readers,
Mhm.
and so you're eliminating a whole, like, I'm moving away from what I now have been doing for 10, 12 years, and that's good, but it's also terrifying. And I'll still keep doing comics. Obviously, I'm doing Bitterroot, and I've got a couple other um, I'm negotiating contracts right now. I was at San Diego Comic Con less than a month ago.
Hmm. Hmm.
Walked away from there with, I'm pretty sure, at least two, maybe three projects that will carry me over
Nice. Nice.
2024, 2025.
Love it. Love it. Very enterprising. I'll mention NCTE seems to
Mm-hmm.
be a wonderful space that people go. I'll mention, of course, Jerry Craft is a wonderful person to connect with, winner of the Newbery.
Oh yeah,
You
no,
talked about
Jerry's one of
great
my
guy,
best
right?
friends. Yeah,
Oh yeah, yeah.
we've known each other for Jerry's kids are both of his kids are out of college and in the real world. But I remember I've known Jerry before those kids were even born, so that'll
Yeah.
give you an
Yeah.
idea of how long we've known each other. And Jerry's pushing me really hard to write a middle grade graphic novel.
Oh yeah.
Um,
Hmm. Hmm.
and I've tried. I can't quite get that voice right. Everything I write is a little too dark, is a little too adult, is a little too whatever. But I love Jerry's work, so yeah. No,
Yeah.
I'll be hitting him up in the next. I got to call him in the next couple days anyway, just for the heck of it.
Yeah, yeah, and one of those people that has straddled the world of comics conventions and teacher conventions. But everything I hear about the YA and kidlit world is that it's warm and positive and friendly.
Yeah,
So I hope that
yeah.
is indeed true, and that's what I've heard.
That's what I've heard too. So and it's just also there's something about, um, again, when I engage with fans that we'll say like are over the age of 25 or 30, you
Mhm.
get people into their 40s and 50s, and it's great. It's great bonding with people who like saw Man from Atlantis when it was on TV first run.
Right,
Um,
right.
but there's also something about talking to young people and especially, I remember going to some scholastic book fairs when I was a kid. I remember meeting some authors, and again, for the kid that I was, who was so obsessed with how things got made, like meeting my first published author was like a huge thing.
Right, right.
It was and I remember going to my first comic book convention in 1979, and I met Wendy and Richard Pinney, who had just started ElfQuest, and
Mhm.
they were
Mhm.
the first. And I didn't really talk to them, but I just remember seeing the stuff and stopping at the table. My mom talked to them briefly, but it was like these people are making their own comic book. Like
Mhm.
you can hold this thing. Like what? Like again, I knew you could do it, but I like with comics, I'd never seen anybody actually do it.
Yeah.
And that sort of stuff for me, it changed everything. And I would like to be able to play in that world a little bit and meet some young people and let them know that, like, yeah, you can do this. It may take you, it probably will take you way longer than you want it to, but you stick with it. You just don't give up.
Mhm. Mhm. Well, I'm putting it out in the world. You will be that for many young readers. I believe that will soon be the case.
I hope so. I hope so. We'll see, I
Yeah.
I'm working on putting my best foot forward, and I mean, I can be a bit abrasive and opinionated, but I also, try not to go beyond PG-13 that often, so
Oh yeah, yeah. But I found too, I'm a more of like a high school, middle school guy, and I was always intimidated at working with young kids.
yeah.
And I have found through working with young kids online in person doing things like if you're authentically you, then I think kids respond to that well. And yeah, I've found that I can still be a sarcastic dude, which is kind of the way that I go about things, and it works. It's okay.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's again, it's I think we tend to be, a lot of us, myself for sure, I tend to be intimidated, and I overthink things to a detriment, but intimidated by that which we don't know. I did my first library convention back in, I've only done one so far. I did it in 2016, and it
Mhm.
was like such a different world. And it was like, you know, wait a minute, there's no cosplayers here, right?
Right, right.
And I'm talking, and you're talking to somebody who, like, librarians are like, they're superheroes, right? I mean,
This is true. This is true.
especially for when you're working in like nonfiction or any subject for that matter. It's like, I can't tell you how many times I went to the library and said, this is what I need to know about.
Mhm.
And they set me, because before there was Wikipedia, there were librarians, so that's always exciting to me. And the thought of being able to go to conventions and hang out with librarians, as weird as that may sound, it's like, a lot of people don't know that at San Diego Comic-Con, there's a certain amount of programming that takes place at the main branch of the public library, which is
Mhm.
walking distance from the convention center. And 2023 Comic-Con was my first time in maybe 10, 15 years where I didn't have to do something at the library. And I was like, well, the library is way more fun to hang out at than the convention center. And so yeah, this is going to be a really interesting time moving forward into 2024.
Yeah, yeah. Eager to hear about more of the things as they come together, and always glad to have you back on to do a more in-depth second part about any of those works that are on the horizon.
Oh yeah,
And
no, I'll be talking about those till I'm blue in the face as they get closer, for sure.
love it, love it. Um, I'll close with places where people can connect with you, websites, spaces like that that are generative if people want to follow along with projects as they're coming.
Yes. So my website is davidfwalker.com, all one word, and I never update it. So it's really difficult. I guess I do need to update it at some point in the near future. But it also, if you scroll to the bottom of the home page, there's links to, my Instagram, my Facebook. There's probably a link to my Twitter, which I'm not on. That my account is still there, I guess, but I haven't been on Twitter in
Mm,
probably 8 months, 9 months.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and then and on Instagram it's David F. Walker. And I can't even for the life of me remember what my Facebook is. I get confused between my professional and my personal accounts on some of the social media stuff, so there's a lot of spillover. But if you just go to davidfwalker.com, it's there. It'll take you to everything. And I know that I need to work on some of this stuff, right? This is why I reached out to Cami Garcia and Margaret Stahl, because it's like, I need to be better at making sure people know how to um, know about what's going on with me, and getting back into doing podcasts and engaging more. Um, I definitely became sort of reclusive, very reclusive during the pandemic,
Mhm,
and
mhm.
a lot of that still, there's still a lot of social anxiety on my part. Going to San Diego was as difficult as it can be on the during the best of times. This year was like, so, like, it was one of the first times I had to go out in public in
Right.
like nearly 6 7 months. So
Yeah, yeah. Well, glad that you said yes to this engagement, and glad to have you back on anytime. And I appreciate your time, appreciate your work, and looking forward to all the things.
thank you. It was a pleasure to converse with you.
Likewise, likewise.